Bigfoot real?
Sightings in and around Vermont have a popular network television show coming to our region.
Bigfoot sightings across New England have been reported for hundreds of years.
The red glowing eyes, about 7 feet tall, making a sound like a pig squealing or a woman screaming, and walking like a man but looking more like a gorilla.
That's the most common description researcher and Bigfoot author Paul Bartholomew says he hears from those who say they've seen the Sasquatch.
It's a global phenomena, and it's here in our own backyards.
Just east of Whitehall, sightings have been reported all along Route 4 and all across the state of Vermont from Bennington to Colchester. Frank Cienski of Hubbardton believes a Bigfoot was near his home.
One section of my apple tree, the apples were completely devoured, one whole section, and I pointed it out to my wife, and she says, "Oh God," she says, "the deer must have been hungry." And I said, "No, a deer couldn't eat that many apples in one night."
So Cienski set up a trail camera, trying to catch the Sasquatch on tape. On one September night 2 years ago, he recorded this.
We found out from researchers and experts that this is a female Sasquatch with a young underneath it. It is protecting its young.
So we are in Rutland, Vermont today. We are filming a movie, 2 movies and a series, but while we're here, I thought it would be good to get out into the woods with some local researchers. So I have asked 2 of my friends, Steve Calls and Mike Ian, to kind of show us the area, take us to some sighting locations. So that's what we're doing. Right now, we're outside of Rutland, following them, and we're gonna head out to at least 2 different sighting locations somewhere outside of town. But Vermont is not a part of the country that I've had much experience in. Mostly the only time I've been here has been traveling through on my way to other places. But I would say the closest I've come to being in Vermont is when we were filming Beast of Whitehall and On the Trail of Bigfoot, The Journey. So I'm excited to get out into the woods and hear about some of the sightings that have taken place here. I mean, the one thing I can say as someone who has not spent time in this state is that I was shocked at how mountainous, rugged, and somewhat rural certain parts of the state are. On my drive to Rutland, I was really surprised at the amount of forest and mountains that we were driving through, and not like hills that are masquerading as mountains, but actual mountains. So yeah, we're gonna learn more about Vermont today and see what we can find in terms of Bigfoot habitat. Spend enough time talking to Bigfoot researchers and you start to notice a pattern. Some of the most grounded, clear-headed voices in the field tend to come from backgrounds in law enforcement or investigation. Folks who don't just get pulled in by stories. They ask questions, look for patterns, and pay attention to the details. Steve Calls is one of those voices. Known to most as the Sasquatch detective, Steve came into this world after a long career in private investigation and loss prevention. And when he turned that investigative lens towards Sasquatch, he brought with him a no-nonsense approach rooted in evidence and first-hand inquiry. He's traveled the country, digging into Bigfoot reports with a skeptical eye and a genuine curiosity. Steve was featured in one of our earliest STM films, and over the years, we've become friends. He's someone I trust to cut through the noise and get to the heart of a story. Mike Ian's path was a little different, but just as rooted in boots-on-the-ground experience. Mike is still an active law enforcement officer in New York, and it was Steve who brought him into the world of Bigfoot research. Since then, he's worked with groups like NESRA, the Pennsylvania Bigfoot Society, and Project Zoobook, a group of scientists and professionals from various fields, all trying to piece together the Sasquatch mystery. Like Steve, Mike's appeared in past Small Town Monsters films, and like Steve, he's become a friend. He's the kind of guy who brings both heart and logic to the table, balancing family life, fieldwork, and a thoughtful approach to a topic most people write off as fantasy. What ties them together isn't just their law enforcement backgrounds or their long resumes. It's the way they treat people, the way they approach witnesses with empathy, the way they follow leads without losing their skepticism. In a field full of noise, Steve and Mike have always been the kind of voices I'm glad to have around. They remind you that this search isn't just about what's out there in the woods, but how we go about finding it. Steve, how long have you been researching in the area?
27 years. Yeah. 1998 I started, but I started really hitting boots on ground in 2000. But I was involved in research, learning about it. It was in '98 when I read Monsters of the Northwoods that said, "Hey, I didn't realize they were in my backyard." And I mean, literally, it wasn't my backyard, but a couple of hours is my backyard, really. So it's...
Mike, how much time have you spent researching this area?
On and off. A couple days here and there. Usually I come down with Steve and kind of bounce along. So usually on this side of the state, usually support. So extra cameras, gear, I'll come over and give them a hand. But I'm 4.5 hours over on the other side of the state. So coming over to hang with Steve or Frank, or I'm also a member of NESRA. So we've kind of worked this whole area more towards the Lake George area. But you know, if we got a down day or something like that, I'll drive the roads and stuff like that over here. So,
Steve, can you tell us where we are? Because right now we're just off. First of all, what highway is this?
This is Route 4 in Vermont, and this will actually take us right into Whitehall from here. It goes eastward to Rutland and westward to U.S. Route 4, which obviously will, you know, the great. And lined up around Route 4 are all these sightings over the years. You have about 2 miles down the road there, you have the Grabowski farm, where they had seen a group of a family of 4 Bigfoot walking around. We are, maybe 15 miles to Whitehall, if that. It's about as far as here to Whitehall as Whitehall is to where my research area is. So it makes it all very geographically accessible. I mean, you look and you may have these little bits of road, but it's mostly pristine forest. And you look, there's sighting. And then as you go to Route 4, there's even more sightings along that road. So
what you said, Bird Mountain, which one is that?
Bird Mountain is the one right there. Yeah, it looks like it has the old caldera in it.
What's the significance of that?
Well, Bird Mountain, the owners on the other side there was an old ski resort. What happened is they were out one day and they had observed from a far distance a family of Sasquatch moving across the field. And I believe there was even a photograph of it too. Now that my mind goes back to it, because this happened again in the 70s. You know, the same time Bear Road was having all their stuff. But back in, I want to say 2017, on the backside of the mountain, along that ridge, in between the ridge between this mountain and that particular mountain, a gentleman was driving his ATV up Bird Mountain and had one zip in front of him. It's all private property, so it's like, And like right over in here, where this mountain was, is where Dr. Warren Cook's daughter had the sighting. That's right over here.
Awesome.
and there's Bird.
Yeah.
It's just really wild. And then, of course, you go a little bit that way, and there's Castleton, which is the home of Dr. Warren Cook.
Yeah. All right, yeah, if we can get over that way, I think that'd be cool. There are names tied to this subject that most people have never heard. People who spent their lives chasing answers quietly, without fanfare. That's something I've noticed in this line of work. The most important voices are often the ones speaking the softest. Bill Brand was one of them. He founded the Northern Sasquatch Research Society and spent decades investigating sightings in the Adirondacks and northern New England. Bill was one of the few who tried to give structure to the search out here, organizing reports, tracking activity, trying to bring the same level of seriousness to this region that the Pacific Northwest tends to get by default. He passed away in 2024, and even though he may not be a household name in the world of Bigfoot, his work mattered. His efforts mattered. Without people like Bill, a lot of what we know about this region's encounters would have just faded into the fog. Another name is Dr. Warren Cook. Cook was a professor at Castleton College in Vermont, and what made him different, what made him valuable, was that he didn't dismiss this subject out of hand. He didn't treat it like a joke. He brought an academic lens to something that usually gets laughed out of the room. He investigated reports seriously. He talked to witnesses like they were people, not punchlines. And he saw patterns here, specifically in this part of Vermont, that others were ignoring. Cook worked closely with researchers like Paul Bartholomew and Bill Brand, and together they helped preserve some of the most compelling accounts to come out of the Northeast. And it's fitting that not far from where Cook worked, something strange happened. Something that still doesn't have an answer. In 1995, a man and his cousin set off on a mountain biking trip through the Calvin Coolidge State Forest just outside of Plymouth. Their destination was an old lean-to called the Tinker Brook Shelter, perched on the edge of a steep ravine near the backside of Killington Peak. It's not a place you get to easily. You've got to drive up a winding switchback road, park on a bend barely visible from the highway, and hike the rest of the way in. It's the kind of spot you pick if you want to be completely alone. They got up there, set up camp, and turned in for the night. Around midnight, one of them woke up to what felt like something pushing against the shelter. A bump, a shove, then another. Not loud, but deliberate. At first they thought maybe it was a bear or a moose, so one of them stepped outside with a flashlight and circled the back of the shelter. Nothing. No eye shine, no movement. Just dark trees and the sound of the forest holding its breath. But the bumps came again and again, for hours. Whatever it was never tried to break in, never made itself fully seen. It just made its presence known, steady, consistent pressure, as if to say, you're not alone out here. They didn't sleep much that night, and when morning came, there was no damage to the shelter, no tracks in the dirt, no broken branches. Just an overwhelming feeling that they'd stepped somewhere they weren't supposed to be. They packed up and left. That kind of low-level intimidation, where nothing happens but everything feels wrong, that's something I've heard before, in different parts of the country, remote campsites, deep woods. Some researchers believe it happens when you've gone too far into a creature's territory. Not enough to provoke violence, just enough to remind you that you've crossed a line. And when I think about people like Warren Cook, it's reports like this that make his legacy feel that much more important. He helped legitimize these kind of stories. He gave them context, a framework. He understood that you don't always need to see a monster to know you've encountered something unnatural. These stories don't come with proof. They don't offer closure, but they stick with people for decades. Because it's one thing to believe in something. It's another to feel it in the dark, just on the other side of a shelter wall.
Yeah, this is my Larson special.
So Steve, where are we now?
So we're on the backside of Bird Mountain. And this is where the ATV rider had his roadside encounter. He's coming up the road and one ran in front of him and he just kept on going. And then he got up he said he got up about a little bit and then looked back, but he didn't see anything. So,
What did he describe?
7 foot, 8 foot, hairy bipedal. I think he said it was black in color. It wasn't, brown or reddish brown. It was black. So definitely he saw it making strides. He said, from what I can recall, he said it had a very large stride. Like it was only like a couple of steps for it to get over the road. And as you can see, the road isn't very wide either. So I can probably make it over in 4 or 5 steps myself.
How did that report come to you?
I actually came at one of the earlier Whitehall Sasquatch festivals. Yeah, we did a number of years ago. We did like a little town hall, and somebody had come forward and said, "Yeah, I live behind Bird Mountain, and drive my ATV up just this past. I think he said just the past August of, and this had to be. I want to say this was around 27." Could be 2017, could be earlier too, because there's been so many of them that, not writing it down, but you remember things. And the same year, and I believe it was 2017, because in the same year we had another roadside crossing in Route 4, just outside of Fairhaven in New York, near Abear Road, where a family of 4 had seen one cross that was actually walking alongside the road, and as they came up, it tooled in. And then they actually kind of stopped, not said anything, and then all of a sudden they started talking about it because they were all trying to digest what they had seen. But again, this guy says he's up here all the time, and that was the first time he had ever seen anything like that.
I know you and the way you put this stuff together. Can you, I know we already did this in a movie,
Sure,
but can you talk about like how you think this is all connected?
Yeah. So if you follow like this area with the Whitehall area, and you just see this whole string of sightings. And that's not coincidence. This has been going on since the 40s and 30s even. Some of the stories I've heard people talk about their grandparents having sightings, or their aunts and uncles having sightings. In fact, the last Whitehall Festival, I talked to a guy who had to be in his 90s actually, and he had told me that when he was a young boy, it goes back to the 20s and 30s, he had a sighting in Whitehall. And, and looking at them, they're not looking for any notoriety or anything. So I think, they're pretty legit. But if you just follow the MO and, again, the types of forest, why does one season seem to favor this area versus the Adirondacks, which seem to favor another season? So I think what happens is in the summer, if you notice it's a little more dense here than it is, because I've always wondered why do they go to the Adirondacks, and I think I just finally triggered in on it. If you notice, the forest is much more compacted here. There's less airflow. But you go up in the Adirondacks, especially in the summertime, there's more airflow. So it's probably a little cooler for them, and less humid for them in the Adirondacks. So in the August, we see them move, or July, we see them activity pick up in the Adirondacks. They go on till about mid-November when it starts to get a bit nippy, and then the activity picks up over on this side where the forest is more condensed. There's a lot more pine in these forests than over there. The eastern side of the Adirondacks, there's a lot of birch, maple, oak, so they all drop their leaves. Whereas here you have, not so much in this part, but you can still see some pine trees here and there. Yeah. And as far as further up you go Bird Mountain, the more pine there is. So they may come down and forage for food or water and then go back up during the winter times. But they're, you know, they have that cover with the pine leaves.
Have you seen that play out in terms of like, is there a preponderance of sightings here at certain times of the year as opposed to like the Adirondacks? Because that's the other thing, is like we're super close to the Adirondacks.
Yeah, you get a lot more in the springtime on this side, and then the late summer and fall you get it over in the Adirondacks. Yeah. But I don't think it's necessarily exclusive either. I think there's some that stay behind, there's some that don't, in either context. It depends, again, if you follow primates and how they live and how their families work. You know, you may have the lone males that they're going out to find their own way. And matter of fact, there's a good biological reason for doing that, is that so it cuts down on inbreeding. So that's why, even like in chimpanzee groups, why is it, you know, if they all, like gorillas, mountain gorillas, why do they all live in this contained area, you know, in Rwanda, but don't have a big inbreeding problem? It's because the lone males go off on their own. They find, just as part of their natural instinct, find something they're not related to. So I think that's perhaps what goes on with a Bigfoot or a Sasquatch being a primate, and why sometimes you get these weird type of sightings. Like, why do you have one over here? But again, you listen to the report, it was a big, really big one, burly one, and it just took off when it got seen. What I always look for is that territorial type of behavior. I haven't seen that over here yet, but we have seen it over in the Adirondacks.
So you mean like aggressive kind of territorial?
Yeah, like throwing rocks, screaming, escorts.
Do you have an example?
Yeah, the John Weitzel case back in 2000, which brought me to my research area. Him and his wife went off trail. They were about a quarter mile off trail when something began to scream at them. And now John had been up there all his life. He lived up there. He says he's dealt with bear and other things up there. He goes, whatever it was, he goes, shook my chest. So they decided to leave, and as they're leaving, John could see a dark, tall figure just moving from tree to tree to tree, kind of keeping an eye on them, screaming even some more until the point they got out.
Did he describe the scream like high pitch or?
No, it was like just a roar. And he said it just got him in the chest. And he says, I've been up here with bear, and bear, and a lot of people think, people go in the woods and they hear growling. And I've heard this used, it was probably a bear growling them outside town. Bears don't growl, they don't have the vocal cords to growl. That's why they grunt and they smack their lips. That's how they show their aggression and tension.
It's the only thing I will say that I've realized since we got here, Mike, you might be able to speak to this too. It's like, I'm from Ohio. It's wild to drive like 5-6 hours and be in a place where there's signs for, like, warning signs for moose. And then when you look at the fact that there's also like a very substantial bear population in a state the size of Vermont, like, I don't think people realize how many black bear there are in this part of the country in general.
Well, even in New York, there's 5 figures of bear in New York. Oh, yeah. And there's supposed to be bear in my research area. We've yet to see one. Really? Up here, yet to see one. Yeah.
And there's like 70, they're saying there's 7,200, 7,500 bear.
Here's a real funny thing, is that you have Rensselaer County, which is the county up from Columbia County, city of Troy, which is a city of 27,000 people. And right on the outskirts of Troy, there's a moose caught in a camera of a gas station going. So it's wildlife can be anywhere. So when people say, oh, there's a Bigfoot, Bigfoot can't necessarily be there unless it's a big arterial surrounded by arterial thoroughfares. Sure, he can.
Yeah, the presence of like moose and bear up here, I think, is a good.
Yeah,
it's there. I mean, you've got plenty of paths. Looking through here, looking at the game trails that are coming through here, right what I'm looking at now. I was running the bird app to kind of see what's coming up here bird-wise, but we're talking, so we're getting more of that.
Checking for birds on Bird Mountain.
Yeah. But I mean, it's such a crazy thing when you do think about something the size of a moose and how much they see up here and how much they're migrating. I mean, even talking to some folks in New York State, they're already there's sightings over on my side of the state. So, you know, the big heavy concentration over here, but it's really weird just to see what those pockets are. I mean, you even have like the wolf sightings and some of the cat sightings more over here than you have, quote unquote, 15 minutes down the road, or a little farther than that, you know, in New York State. I mean, we're right sitting on the border right now.
And then you see these clumps of sightings. Like, I'll give you a great example. 1976, you have this big, from 1974 to 1976, you have these whole rash of sightings in Whitehall. It kind of gets quiet for a few years, but there's sporadic ones here and there, but not to the concentration. In the 80s, then you had Kinderhook, where you get this big concentration. I mean, you didn't see me on my other talking with Heather, but I met an old school friend, and he goes, oh yeah, you're into the Bigfoot thing, yeah. Well, my father lives down in Kinderhook. He saw one in his driveway. Was it in the 80s? Yeah. So you have all these congruences. And I'll give you another, in 2006, there was another flap in Whitehall. You know, we had a sighting where we had 5 people see the same Bigfoot within 30 minutes in 2 separate encounters in the same 100-foot area of space. And then we have another sighting down the road, maybe a quarter of a mile, half mile. That person didn't even know what had happened on the hill a week before. And so you get these things that just, another interesting thing too is that in 76 when you had that flap, the apple orchard was actually on the Abearside Road. Right now they're all dead, they've all been cut down, there's some development going in on there. So, and it's right on the Vermont border. There was an apple orchard to the, I want to say, north side of Route 4. In 2006, there's an apple orchard on the south side of Route 4, and that's where all the 2006 flap was going. I was over that way. So is there a, and then you look at the other thing, you look at the Vermont trail cam photo, apple tree involved. You look at the,
I was just about to ask.
You look at the New York Baby Village, aka the Pridgeon film. Behind them was an old apple orchard. So yeah, we have the Grabowskis, which was down there, and then Professor Warren Cook's daughter had a sighting that was approximately there. I mean, this is on the road as the road bends around. So you have all these sightings, one after the other after the other. What it says to me is that we have a population of something living somewhere in here. How many of them there are, I'm not an ecologist to say. What I did, my background is investigation, so I mean, I can put A, B, and C together and modus operandi and behavioral aspects of it together and say, hey, investigatory-wise, I have a lot of evidence to prove that there's something here. But scientifically, you need to have obviously a stronger mantle than that. You need to have something physical. But the evidence, as far as and I hate when people call a lot of it is anecdotal. Me telling you these stories is anecdotal. But when you have a witness standing there, that's direct testimony. Like when I'm anecdotal about everything except my own 2 sightings. We always fall into that trap of what the skeptics are harping on. Years ago, it was there's not enough food in the forest to support a creature this big. And after a while, we got, well, that's kind of laughable because a black bear, or a moose, but a black bear, for example, is even more of an outstanding example because they have to put on pounds to hibernate. So they eat, within a 3-month period, they have to eat 15,000 calories a day for 3 months before they can hibernate. If they can do that in a forest, why can't a Sasquatch eat 4,000 or 3,000 calories a day to maintain their own body weight? But you think about it, there are more skunks near human beings, there's more raccoons near human beings than they are out in the wild. I mean, you go out into the forest of, where we've been, you never see a skunk, you never see a squirrel, you never see a raccoon.
You'll see a porcupine once in a while.
You'll see a porcupine once in a while, or even a possum. But even possums generally tend to go because they scavenge. What you see in a Sasquatch or a Bigfoot is that innate ability to realize I want to live here, but when it's time to eat, I need to come in closer, which is another reason why you might see them looking at campsites, looking at people. We generalize to anthropomorph things and say, well, they must be curious about us. They must be curious about our young. Maybe they're just looking for their next meal.
Yeah, and right? I mean, that's a big thing. I mean, when you say density population per thing, I mean, if you look at Jersey with their bear population, I mean, I have a friend that had an ant that was attacked going between the 2 houses in a residential neighborhood.
North Jersey at that.
Yeah, I mean, you just don't know. Like, you got to get out, you got to see what's in the area, collect as much data on what's there. Again, with security cameras, trail cameras, we're picking up more stuff. I mean, I have one security camera at my house that's just sitting on a field to see what's coming in. And it's interesting to watch deer when they're not paying attention for everything that's in the yard and they're out playing or something on the side. So the ability there to catch some things might be down the line. But again, it's collecting that data.
There's a tendency when people talk about Bigfoot to imagine it tethered to just a handful of places. The Pacific Northwest, the Rockies, maybe the swamps of the South. But what gets overlooked, again and again, is the dense patchwork of wilderness here in the Northeast. Parts of Vermont still feel untouched. The forests are deep, the terrain is rugged, and there's just enough mystery to the landscape that you start to understand why people might say something still walks these woods. When we talk about whether there's suitable habitat for a creature like Sasquatch, this part of the country checks a lot of boxes. Vast stretches of unbroken forest, water sources, a decent food supply, and maybe most importantly, not a lot of people, especially not after dark. But the thing is, if you follow these ridgelines and valleys just a little ways west, you end up in one of the most storied, mysterious regions on the East Coast, the Adirondack Mountains of New York. We came here back in 2020 during the filming of On the Trail of Bigfoot: The Journey, camped at the base of Buck Mountain near Lake George. I remember thinking as we hiked the trail that afternoon how it felt like we'd stepped into a completely different world. Moss-covered boulders, tight clusters of pine, everything smelled wet and ancient. That night, nothing happened. No knocks, no eye shine, just the stillness of the woods and the occasional whippoorwill. But the history of that mountain, of that area, is anything but quiet. Back in July of 2000, a man and his wife were hiking that very same trail, Buck Mountain, when they left the path to take photos near a creek. They thought they were alone. Only one other car was at the trailhead. But then they heard it, a deep guttural sound, something between a roar and a scream. It was loud, so loud it didn't seem possible that it came from a human. The man was a seasoned outdoorsman. He'd faced down bear before. He knew what bobcats sounded like, coyotes. This wasn't that. Whatever it was moved toward them, snapping branches, circling, screaming again, 7 times in total. At one point, it was only 25 feet away. They couldn't see it through the trees, but they could feel it watching them, following them. They ran terrified, and whatever it was kept pace alongside them in the brush, tracking them all the way back to the trailhead. 15 years later, and not far from there, just off the eastern shoreline of Lake George, another couple had a sighting that's hard to explain. They were boating on a sunny June afternoon, idling slowly through a narrow channel, when they spotted movement along the shoreline. Something large, black, upright. It raised one arm, turned, and vanished behind the trees. The woman said it was swaying side to side, not like a bear, but something different, human-like. And as they grilled dinner on a nearby island a short time later, both of them felt a strange pressure, a weird sense that they were being watched. It was enough to cut the meal short and send them packing. That shoreline is protected state land, designated forever wild. You could hike for miles in either direction and never see another person. And what's more, it's just a few miles south of Whitehall, New York, home to some of the most well-documented Bigfoot encounters east of the Mississippi. There's a pattern here. These aren't fleeting shadows darting across roads or shaky blobs in the woods. These are close encounters, vocalizations, a sense of presence, sightings near water, sightings in the thick of the forest, sightings near Buck Mountain, where we spent a quiet night in 2020, aware of just how loud things can get when the forest decides to speak.
You know, there was
went all over the place.
A fast run through that night,
Yeah.
and it was a quiet night, you know.
Yeah, it was weirdly quiet. And it happens. It goes in waves.
That's still a location I'm still trying to figure out, that we had a rock incident. Like, I literally went through, checked all the trees to make sure we didn't pine, oak, you know, acorns, whatever. But whatever it was stitching up the side of the car and coming skipping across.
But they weren't heavy.
They weren't, no, they're small.
See,
Buck Mountain too, just real quick for people watching who don't know, explain where Buck Mountain is, especially in relation to Whitehall.
It's about 7 or 8 miles south west of Whitehall. It's probably the nearest, closest forested corridor near Whitehall, and it's traditionally had a lot of sightings. I mean, you think about it, for an area that's got about as much thoroughfare as we here, has had, you know, dozens of sightings over the last 20 years. Now, you may not think that's much, but it's not a very highly populated human population there. It's people just going in, and then all of a sudden, oh, there it is.
Yeah, I hate to do it again, but can you walk us through those real quick?
So, well, let me give you a history of that area stem to stern, and it has had its periods of nothing happening to, so maybe it's a cyclical thing where they come and they go and they come back after a few years, depending on what.
Have you noticed what the period is? Is it like 2 to 3 years?
COVID messed that up. Really? Yeah. COVID. No one was there. No, everyone was there. Everyone was there. Everyone was there. So let me.
That's when I was there.
That's why we couldn't find a parking spot when we hit the
That
mountain.
never happened. I have seen one park ranger up there at that point in 19 years. Whitesville has a sighting in 2000. I'm up there in 2000. They continue on, and I keep researching that area. Finally, in 2010, there was a very strange event. We kept hearing things kind of moving around us. After which, we decided, let me leave a recorder in the camp. And we leave. We walk down the hill. There's only 3 of us. And a little while later, you hear on the camp. Now, mind you, this is September, October. So there's you hear some leaf litter, and you hear right up against the microphone. Ugh. And then you just hear it keep on going. Interesting. In 2011, everybody was hearing that movement. I bring the teams in, and we're going to take a break before we go out for our evening run. So everybody's getting something to eat. We're quarterling and having a good time. And I'm like, my headlamp's kind of low. Let me go get some batteries. And I open up my car door, get my batteries, light up a cigarette, put out my flashlight, look down to the, looking north is downhill, which is where all the activity. Yeah, which is where all the activity was. Nothing. Look up, and there is one standing next to a telephone pole on the dirt road, actually looking at me now. But I'm sure he was spying on our campsite, what they do, wondering, because we're cooking food, something smells good, so who knows? And it's like, anyway, after shaking a light, it took off. A year later, I had a bunch of researchers up there, and I unzipped my tent after a night doing stuff, and as I'm there, I see a 5.5 foot one, and I just, so you look at that, and then in 2013, it got quiet again, and then it started to pick up in 2017 when Mike and I were up there and rocks were being thrown, but then COVID hit, so we weren't up there for a few years. In 2022, we were up there. It was kind of quiet, a little here and there, but nothing major. And then in 2023, which was the real pinnacle, because Alex was with us, and I do something I have done for the last 20 years, and that's always I announce myself. Because they're curious, let me, I just used to whoop a couple of times and knock, then eventually the last few years I started talking a little bit, going, hey guys, I'm here, and it's okay. Because that's how Jane Goodall did it, that's how Diane Fossey did it. Primates can recognize voices. They can recognize, dogs can. So meanwhile, while I'm doing that, and I whistled, and while I'm doing that, you hear Alex and the crew he was with over on the side. But what was that? Oh, okay, that's Steve. And then a minute and a half later, we get a single clear whoop call coming up there, and everybody was like, what the hell was that? Alex said it was probably the best whoop he's ever heard.
Yeah.
And
can you describe it? Yeah.
Dude, did you just hear that?
Yep.
Yeah.
Dude. I truly think they know me by now. I mean, if there's one that are habituating, there's that guy. He never causes any problems. He just stomps around the woods and whatnot. And I mean, weird stuff. I mean, we would walk down the road during this time period, back in the 2011, 2012s. I had my son up there, and I think it was 2017, 2018. And as we're walking down me and another guy walked down. I don't know if you were there that night, Mike, but we walked down the road, and as we're walking down the dirt road, we hear something moving along the woods on one side of us and the other side. So we stop, and it stops. We start going back the other way. It's following us back up that way. What does that? Yeah. So then I turned around, I sent my son and his friend, both in Fish and Wildlife Management now, and guess what my son does now? He's a New York State Forest Ranger. And they walk down there.
He's part of the cover-up.
Yeah, it's part of the cover-up. Walks down the road, and They come back. I said, something's following us on both sides of the road. We didn't tell them what was going on. Just go down there, tell me what you think. Something's following us on both sides of the road. Nothing does that. Yeah, no kidding. So that's the kind of behavior. It's not aggressive. It's very passive. I think because I've gotten to know, we're not really in their territory anyway. Their territory is further in, which I would expect them to be a little hostile if we start delving in, especially if something sensitive is going on, like mating or taking care of their young or anything like that. But it's just amazing the number of experiences. I mean, I had another team member see the shadow. We had a couple other members see one in the daytime there. Very briefly, we were spying on a mountain off, and I caught it too. And you just see this. They saw it better than I did, but I just saw this brown thing go. Now, the only other thing that would have been that color is either a bear or a Bigfoot. It wasn't that tall off a tree, because literally it was like I could see the tree and I could just see this real quick movement once, and they were like, "Holy crap! What the hell was that?" Was like,
have you talked to any rangers up in that part of the region that have said they actually encountered anything?
They're very tight-lipped about that. You see, you got to understand that NCON is run by scientists. Recently, there's a good one. Recently, iFoil requested NCON for any New York State NCON report or any kind of New York State forest report for any Bigfoot reported sighting at all and any details of the report. I got a letter back from them 60 days later as per the FOIL request, saying they could find no reports of anybody reporting a Bigfoot to NCON from 2017 till February 1, 2025. So if they're being reported, they're not being documented because either one, we don't want a bunch of crazy people in the woods with guns, right? Or two, well, I believe you, man, but I ain't gonna write this up because people think I'm crazy. So I think that's the dichotomy there.
Yeah.
The stretch of land running from western Vermont into the eastern Adirondacks feels like one massive, uninterrupted forest. It's not often thought of as Bigfoot country, but once you're there, off the pavement, away from cell signal, you start to understand why so many people come away from these woods with stories they can't explain. The terrain is rugged, remote, and strangely silent. You could spend a weekend in the woods here without seeing another soul. It feels like the kind of place something could hide. And maybe it does. Despite being split by Lake Champlain, this region blends together almost seamlessly. The Green Mountains of Vermont roll westward into the thick wilderness of upstate New York, where towns get smaller and the woods only get deeper. Whitehall might be the area's most famous Bigfoot hotspot, but it's not the only place strange things happen. One story from the early 90s stands out, not because of what it claims Bigfoot did, but because of how bizarre and unsettling the encounter was. Two brothers were canoeing along the shore of Lake George at sunset when they spotted something standing among the rocks near Deer Leap. A small, thin figure, brownish red in color, with a face one of the men described as a giant lemur. It stood upright, still, almost like it was waiting. Then slowly it climbed into a nearby pine tree and melted into the bark, tucking its head down, its body blending in so well it vanished before their eyes. It didn't act like a bear, or even a person. It acted like something else, something watching them, deciding whether they belonged there. Not far from that very location years later, something else would make its presence known in a much more direct way. These forests have a way of keeping their secrets, but sometimes those secrets don't mind throwing a rock or two to remind you they're still around.
The rock throwing incident, because you were there for this, can you walk us through that? Like, what happened?
The first one there up at Buck, yeah, it's a pretty standard thing for me, I guess. Steve's working on the camera behind an SUV. I'm leaning on the passenger side because we're waiting to get some new gear up and running. Got a light sprinkle going on, and something comes right across the top of the SUV. It was the older style Equinox, and I get one right in the middle of the forehead.
And that's
you know, I've turned everything off because I'm waiting for him to finish things up. So I got a recorder. So there's like some audio of me swearing, you know, of course everything's turned off. And it was the first night I had thermal camera, so still trying to get used to that. But it was just, you could hear it, and we had some like whoop or something coming in. But again, it's late at night trying to figure out exactly what launched whatever it was. And again, you're getting up with a flashlight, you're looking above. What do I got above? I mean, that's the first thing I do when I go in the woods is look for the pine trees and stuff like that. Because if you get a pine cone, good heavy pine cone hitting the ground, it'll sound like something's walking in the woods. Or if it's heavy, and they'll drop at all times of the year. So it doesn't make a difference. When those things are full, they'll drop. And if they come through, it sounds like the knock. So it's one of those things you always got to kind of rule out. And again, no acorns, nothing there. All we have is small gravel around us. The second one, Steve's up filming where another witness had a sighting, and we're walking the trail. I go out to support him with some extra thermal cameras, running the bird weather app and everything, and kind of pull some stuff in. And
well, I had heard something. Remember, I had heard something very large moving through the woods. And I even said, we were doing a live podcast at that point, and I was like, well, I'm not gonna say this is Bigfoot. There's something large there. So I'm gonna back up because I don't know if there's a moose, because there is an area where there's a moose around there. I know if it's a bear, so I'm gonna start backing up. Mike, you wanna come up here? So Mike gets geared up and comes down. Go ahead.
Yeah, and again, you got a noise, and you can hear plain as day. You can hear that rock coming through, and you know we're on a path similar to this, so you can hear that skid across the ground.
Remember the tree knock just prior to?
Yeah.
They had a tree knock that was just prior, just out of the blue.
All that's on Buck Mountain, too. All that's on Buck Mountain.
No, this is actually on Lincoln Mountain, which is a county over. I was investigating another site.
Okay. County over in which direction?
To the west. Saratoga County.
Less mountainous or more? Because the Adirondacks are weird. A lot of people don't realize how
it's mountainous. It's mountainous, and guess what? There's a little pond on top of that, and then, on that side, then you have that mountain. You have some hounds.
It's kind of similar to what we're up in here. I mean, same type of vegetation. You know, you've got, it's a little stony. You got some old logging roads in there. I mean, that's a lot of the stuff. It's going to have a lot of logging roads, especially Adirondacks. Going to have a lot of that.
And that rock pluck, because we were on rocks, was just like you could hear that little skitter, but you could hear it coming through the thing. You hear, unreal.
Yeah, I mean, again, are you seeing what's throwing it? No, but it's something you got to put in a notebook and say, hey, what happened here, you know, and then go back and take a look, you know, and it's one of those things. It's just, okay, what happened here on this date, what, you know, preceded his sighting, the other sightings at Buck, so you're going to take that, you're going to put it into this setup, you know.
Yeah, there's actually a number of sightings over in Saratoga County, too, in that whole area. There's like 4 or 5 that are all clustered. And again, clusters.
We're talking an hour and a half drive time. So we're talking within 75 miles.
Saratoga,
well, I mean, from where we're standing right now.
Yeah.
So we're talking about sightings here. We're talking sightings. You guys are in Kinderhook. You know, how long it took you to get to there. You know, in this Northeast region, how many sightings, if you took a look, if you looked at the lakes, streams, waterways, the pathways to get through, the green pathways of movement. You know, stuff moves all the time. How are you getting, you know, that's a big question. How is something getting around or through? It happens all the time where people get through. You have you just had a huge manhunt out west, you know. How did somebody get through that, you know? But how's a 1,500-pound something?
How many years? 5 years. Yeah.
So, I mean, it's, you know, I spent a lot of time on thermal cameras, thermal drones. Another time we were at Buck, there's a old growth where they went through and they cut not old growth, but an old logging area where they cut everything down. Well, when they replant, what happens when people replant? They generally replant everything right in line. And these guys are here, say I'm another 10 foot over to the side, actually it was on the far side from them. They see something moving, I come up with a camera to try to get some shots, because like, it's big, it's black, and at the distance, I'm the only one with any kind of zoom with a camera. But the way the trees are all lined up, it's that whole
line of sight.
It's there. It's like, yeah, everything is this way, but as soon as you get that parallel, you lose everything. So trying to get those shots off, just to confirm, what did they see? Did they see a bear at the top of the hill? Was it, something else? Not a hiker per se, because they're saying solid black and, moving off into the woods. But again, I can't get a shot because of what I'm looking for. I mean, I'm looking right through here now. I'm looking up, there's a rock. I've been trying to figure out if it's a gravestone or something like that, because we know we're supposed to be near a cemetery. And it's just where you're moving, you're gonna find things. As you guys sit through a camera or somebody watches from home, that whole movement, again, that's a big tree, I'm standing behind it, I go back. I mean, I can do it with some of the smaller trees that we can, the whole optical illusion of where you're at, and it's what we perceive. So I've got video of deer in my front yard going through, and just at the right spot for the tree, and they're gone. So how does something disappear? Get to know what's in your neighborhood. I mean, if there's a big pile of bush, I sat there with my Doberman one day, watched the deer go through. They got behind some weeds of some sort, like a old dead raspberry bush. Again, that coat is gonna blend perfectly, blends right in. These sightings up here are generally a rust or a gray or, a black. Look what's around you. I mean, those are the color schemes that we have on these trees here.
The consensus, though, would be, especially people out west don't understand the amount of wilderness we have in this part of the country, but this is a suitable habitat for a Bigfoot.
And if you think about it, you have Washington County, New York here, which Whitehall is at the very top. At the very bottom, there is Easton Greenwich. They've had sightings along the Route 4 corridor. Then you go to Rensselaer County, and the sightings go right around all the metropolitan areas, and there's sightings in Pittstown, there's sightings in Petersburg, there's sightings down in Naval Park and Grafton, right around the whole thing. And where does that lead right into? Northern Columbia County, Valatia, Kinderhook, and then you go further, you go across the other side. There's been sightings, I just did a sighting in southern Albany County, which is rural as this is. There's the Helderberg mountain range just before the Catskills. Really good sighting report from a couple of wildlife rehabbers. And then you go further south, you're into the Catskills. And the next county down is Greene County. That's the home of the Catskills. So and that corridor goes all the way down to Orange County, which is the base of the Appalachian Trails for New York. And then you have the Green Mountains that come around, and they have their own hook into the Appalachian Trails. So everything is networked.
I mean, pull up a satellite map, lights at night, you can see where those clusters are. And again, areas like this, like Steve says, Catskill area, which is not too far from us here. We're another 2.5 hours. Yeah. You're going down in the Hudson Valley. A lot of like that Hudson Valley, Red Hook and all that, where there are some sightings down that way. A lot of those people are weekenders. They live, work in New York City, but they have weekend homes, or getaway homes, that they're just coming up for those neighborhoods. Not so much now since the economy's changed a little bit, but there's a lot of places up this way, down that way, that are just seasonal use homes. Unless people, well, now more people are working remotely, but we're looking, you're a couple hours to Boston, you're a couple hours to Albany, those are 4 hours to New York City. I mean, you've got enough of the big places, metropolitan areas, that you're 15, 20 minutes outside that are rural,
There's a reason this part of the country keeps showing up in reports. The land here offers what any animal needs to survive. Dense forests for cover, fresh water around every bend, and enough food to support something big. The deeper you get into Vermont and the Adirondacks, the more it starts to feel like anything could be living just beyond the tree line. That's the heart of it. Not just the stories or the people telling them, but the terrain itself. These woods swallow sound. They hide movement. If something wanted to remain unseen, This is the kind of place that could do it without much effort at all. Then you've got the approach. Steve and Mike don't come at this like true believers or armchair theorists. They treat it like an investigation. They ask questions. They dig. They bring years of experience from careers built on chasing facts, not fairy tales. And that mindset, methodical, patient, grounded, might be exactly what this subject needs more of. We didn't set out to prove anything, but what we found out here in the quiet, in the stories, in the land itself, was a reminder that the search still matters, maybe more than ever.